My Weird School Days, Book Number 6. Mrs. Jafee is Daffy. Written by Dan Gutman. Pictures by Jim Pellot. Chapter 10. The Uncivil War. Well, I know one thing. Studies do not show that kids learn better if we eat lots of ice cream, cookies, cake, and candy. After the experiment in Mrs. Jaffee's office, I had to go home and lie down for the rest of the day. I may never eat junk food again, or at least not for a few days. The next morning was Friday, the best day of the week. I was a little late getting to school. By the time I arrived, everybody was in the playground. I ran over there and found the kids in my class. "What's going on?" I asked Ryan. "Beats me," he replied. That's when two guys in army uniforms marched out of the gym. One of them was that guy Stonewall Jackson, who I'm pretty sure was our librarian, Mrs. Rupee. The other one was wearing a blue uniform and a beard, but it was obviously Mrs. Jafee. "You guys and gals gave me an idea the other day," she said. "Studies show the best way to learn is to do the thing you're learning. So I thought the best way to learn about the Civil War would be to reenact it, right here at elementary school." "What? We're gonna have a war in the playground?" one of the fourth graders asked. "You betcha," Mrs. Jafee said. "I will be General Grant of the Union Army, and you know General Stonewall Jackson of the Confederate Army. Any questions?" "Are we going to use real guns?" Andrea asked. "Guns are dangerous." "Of course not," said Mrs. Jafee. "We will act out the war with water guns." The teachers came out of the gym and passed out super soakers to everybody. It was cool. Mrs. Jafee told everybody in second and third grade to go to one end of the playground and everybody in the first and fourth grade to go to the other end. The kindergarten kids were given drums to play on the side because they're too little to handle super soakers. Stonewall Jackson led us to our end of the playground. We all gathered around him. I mean her. "Kids," she said, "we, the people, have nothing to fear but fear itself. 77 years ago, the torch was passed to a new generation, and now it's morning in America." I didn't know what she was talking about. "Charge!" Mrs. Jafee suddenly yelled from across the playground. I looked up and saw about 100 kids screaming as they ran toward us with super soakers. I thought I was gonna die. "Don't fire till you see the whites of their eyes," Stonewall Jackson shouted. After that, it was all pretty confusing. Kids were running all over the place, screaming and shooting water everywhere. Some of those fourth graders were big kids. They were drenching our second graders. We were all getting soaked. Kids were falling down, freaking out, and calling out for their mothers. "Run for your lives!" shouted Neil the nude kid. "Retreat! Retreat! hollered Stonewall Jackson, and we all gathered around her again at the back of the playground. "Listen up," she said. "Those Yankees are beating us badly." "Yankees?" I asked. "Why would we fight a baseball game?" Everybody laughed, even though I didn't say anything funny. Andrea rolled her eyes. "I thought this was supposed to be a civil war," she complained. "It doesn't seem very civil to me." "What are we gonna do, General Jackson?" asked Michael. "There's only one thing we can do," Stonewall Jackson said. "We need to capture Mrs. Jafee. I mean General Grant." "What?" "It's our only hope," Stonewall said. "I need 2 volunteers." Andrea waved her hand in the air, of course, so she got picked. I looked at my shoes so Stonewall wouldn't call on me. "Andrea," Stonewall said, "I need you and AJ to go on a very dangerous mission." "Why me?" I protested. "Ooh," Ryan said. "AJ and Andrea are going on a dangerous mission together. They must be in love. When are you gonna get married?" asked Michael. "Shh," Stonewall Jackson said. "I need you two to sneak through the woods in the back of the playground, come up behind enemy lines, and capture Mrs. Jafee." "How are we gonna do that?" I asked. "With this," Stonewall said, pulling out a big cloth sack. "Yes, sir," Andrea said, taking the sack and saluting. "Good luck," said Stonewall Jackson. "We're counting on you two. Don't let us down." Me and Andrea sneaked off into the woods. It was a long walk to the other side of the playground. "I'm scared, Arlo," Andrea said. "Hold my hand." "Soldiers don't hold hands," I told her. "We could get ambushed by the enemy out there," Andrea said. "Hold my hand, Arlo." "No, please, Arlo." "I'm not holding your hand, and that's final," I said. That's when I spotted Mrs. Jafee. She was all by herself, leaning against a tree and taking a drink from a water bottle. "Look," I whispered to Andrea. "There she is." "Shh." We sneaked up behind the tree. We were just a few feet away from Mrs. Jafee. I could hear her breathing. Andrea lifted the sack in the air and pulled it down over Mrs. Jafee's head. But Mrs. Jafee didn't have the chance to finish her sentence. She was in the sack. Chapter 11. Arurarumra. "Quick!" Andrea shouted. "Take her legs, Arlo." We picked up the sack with Mrs. Jafee in it and rushed back through the woods. "Help!" Mrs. Jafee shouted. "Put me down, doggone it! I'm your vice principal." "No," I said. "You're a prisoner of war, and in the words of Abraham Lincoln, na 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 boo boo on you." "Arlo, I don't think Abraham Lincoln ever said that," Andrea told me. "Well, he should have." Andrea and I finally made it back to our side of the playground. We dumped the sack on the ground in front of Stonewall Jackson. "Great work," Stonewall said. "Put a gag in her mouth to keep her quiet. I mean him." Ryan and Michael wrapped a rag around Mrs. Jaffee's mouth and tied it in the back. "What do we do now?" asked Neil the nude kid. "Tie her up with this rope," Stonewall Jackson said. Neil tied up Mrs. Jafee. Everybody started yelling and cheering as word got around that our side had captured General Grant. "We won!" kids were shouting. "We won the war!" We were all yelling and screaming and celebrating when the strangest thing in the history of the world happened. A plane flew overhead. Well, that wasn't the strange part, because planes fly overhead all the time. The strange part was that something was falling out of the plane. "What's that?" Emily yelled. "It's a parachute," yelled Stonewall Jackson. "They didn't have parachutes during the Civil War," Andrea said. "They didn't have planes either." It didn't matter what they had during the Civil War because the parachute was coming down right over our heads. "It's a man!" Ryan shouted. "It's a man with no hair!" Michael shouted. "It's Mr. Klutz!" Neil shouted. "Hooray for Mr. Klutz!" Everybody started shouting. "He's back!" Everybody was happy to see Mr. Klutz again. But there was just one problem. His parachute was heading straight for the swimming pool at the side of the playground. Splash! It was a real Kodak moment. We saw it, live and in person. Everybody ran over to the swimming pool. "Help!" Mr. Klutz yelled. "I can't swim! Glub, 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 glub!" Stonewall Jackson jumped into the pool and fished out Mr. Klutz before he drowned. "Why didn't you go to the airport?" Ryan asked him. "Well," Mr. Klutz said, "I saw the school out of the window of the plane, and since I learned parachuting at principal camp, I thought that jumping out of the plane would be a lot faster than going to the airport." "Mr. Klutz is nuts. We missed you so much," said Andrea, the big brown-noser. "I missed you all too," Mr. Klutz said. "Where did this swimming pool come from?" "Rent a pool," I said. "You can rent anything." "But why is it in the playground?" he asked. "I nearly drowned." "It was Mrs. Jaffee's idea," Ryan said. "She said studies show kids learn better underwater." "Where is Mrs. Jafee?" asked Mr. Klutz. "She's, tied up," I said. That's when Mrs. Jafee came hopping out of the woods. She was still tied up in the sack. It was hilarious. "What's the meaning of all this, Mrs. Jafee?" asked Mr. Klutz. "Arura-rumra," said Mrs. Jafee. Or at least I think that's what she said. It was hard to tell because she had a gag in her mouth. "I thought I told you I wanted everything to be nice and calm while I was going away," Mr. Klutz said. "It looks like there's a war going on out here." "Arura-rumra," Mrs. Jafee replied. Well, that was pretty much the end of Civil War week. Mr. Klutz helped us untie Mrs. Jafee and take the gag out of her mouth. Maybe she'll stop trying to teach us her weird ways to learn. Maybe Mr. Klutz will learn how to swim. Maybe Swami Have a Banana will get a job as a phys ed teacher in India. Maybe Miss Mull will get her job back. Maybe Mrs. Jafee will stop saying weird stuff like you betcha and okie dokie. Maybe I'll get to eat more cake, cookies, ice cream, and candy. Maybe we'll be able to talk Mr. Klutz into going to the airport like a normal person instead of jumping out of planes. But it won't be easy.